Corporal Nina Vasquez had been peeling potatoes for 6 straight days when the alarm finally sounded. Nobody remembered she'd once led reconnaissance teams through hostile territory. All they saw was the corporal who'd frozen during a live fire exercise and gotten reassigned to the kitchen. But when the mortars started falling and the command structure collapsed, every assumption about Nina Vasquez was about to get shattered. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because what happened next proved the most dangerous person on any base might be the one everyone stopped paying attention to. The hinges on the walk-in freezer needed oil. Nina noticed it every time she hauled out another crate of frozen vegetables, that metallic squeal that set her teeth on edge. 3 weeks at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, and she'd memorized every sound in the kitchen. The rhythm of the industrial dishwasher, the hum of the ventilation fans, the particular rattle the serving trays made when stacked incorrectly. She knew which floor tiles were cracked, which burners ran hot, which section of counter had a wobble that made chopping dangerous. It was amazing what you noticed when nobody expected anything from you anymore. The kitchen assignment had come with a file stamp that might as well have been a scarlet letter. Acute stress reaction. Non-combat duty pending evaluation. Everyone knew what that meant. She'd cracked under pressure, frozen when it mattered, proven herself unreliable when lives were on the line. The Army had plenty of room for broken soldiers, as long as they stayed in places where breaking didn't matter. So Nina peeled potatoes and scrubbed pans and kept her mouth shut about what had actually happened during that exercise. Forward. Operating Base Sentinel sat in a valley, surrounded by mountains that held more insurgents than goats. It wasn't the worst posting in the region, but it wasn't safe either. Mortars dropped in occasionally, usually at night, usually missing anything important. Patrols went out and came back with varying degrees of success. The base maintained its perimeter, processed its intelligence reports, and waited for orders that would either expand their mission or send them home. Standard deployment rhythm for a conflict that had stopped making headlines years ago. Nina had arrived on a supply convoy 3 weeks earlier, her reassignment orders listing her as general support staff with kitchen detail as primary duty. The base commander had barely glanced at her paperwork before signing her in. Another warm body for the rotation, another soldier doing time until their contract ran out or their evaluation cleared them for real duty again. Nothing about her suggested she was anything other than what her current assignment implied. The mess hall operated with industrial efficiency. Sergeant Chen ran the kitchen like a factory floor. Everyone had their station, their tasks, their schedule. Breakfast started at 0500 with coffee and whatever passed for eggs in the powdered mix they received on supply runs. Lunch came at 11:30, dinner at 17:30. Between meals there was prep work, cleaning, inventory, and the endless maintenance that kept institutional kitchens functioning. Nina had been assigned to vegetables and sanitation, which meant she spent most of her day either chopping or scrubbing. The other kitchen staff treated her with the casual indifference reserved for people who wouldn't be around long enough to matter. Sergeant Chen was professional but distant. Private First Class Anderson, who handled the main cooking, seemed perpetually exhausted and rarely spoke to anyone. Specialist Kim worked the serving line and managed to make even scooping food look like an expression of deep personal resentment. They were all counting days until rotation, all going through motions that had stopped having meaning somewhere around month 3 of their deployment. But the infantry soldiers who came through the chow line, they treated Nina differently. Word had spread about her failure during the field exercise, the kind of gossip that moved through a base faster than any official communication. She'd frozen under simulated fire, lost her nerve when it counted. Got people killed even if those people were just actors in a training scenario. That kind of reputation stuck like desert dust, coloring every interaction with assumptions about competence and reliability. Morrison made sure those assumptions stayed fresh. He came through the line every meal with his crew, always had something to say, always delivered with just enough humor that it couldn't be called harassment, but everyone understood the message. Kitchen girl, potato peeler, safe assignment for someone who couldn't handle the real work. His friends laughed on cue, establishing the social order that kept bases functioning. Warriors and support staff, those who could be trusted in combat and those who couldn't. Nina never responded beyond professional acknowledgement. Yes, specialist. I'll make sure of it, of course. She kept her eyes down, did her work, and gave them nothing to escalate. It wasn't cowardice, though Morrison probably saw it that way. It was calculation. Drawing attention meant questions, and questions meant someone might look too closely at her file, at the parts that weren't redacted, at the training courses that didn't match her current assignment. 3 years of classified operations had taught her how to be invisible when necessary. How to blend into backgrounds and avoid notice and let people see exactly what they expected to see. A broken soldier in a kitchen assignment was invisible by definition. Nobody looked twice at failures. Nobody wondered what skills they might be hiding or what experience they might have beyond their current circumstances. They just saw the reassignment code and filled in the story themselves. Captain Mendez was different, though. Nina had noticed her watching during meal services, sitting at the table near the windows with her coffee and tablet, eyes tracking movement patterns like she was mapping something. Mendez had the look of someone who'd done real work before taking a command position. No parade ground polish, no academy softness. Just the weathered competence that came from years of making decisions that mattered. Nina had checked her background discreetly, the way you learned to assess potential threats without seeming interested. Mendez had done 2 tours in intelligence analysis before transitioning to operations. Had a degree in Middle Eastern studies, spoke 3 languages, and had received a Bronze Star for something that was thoroughly redacted in the public record. Not someone who took things at face value. Not someone who accepted official narratives without question. That made her dangerous in ways Morrison and his crew could never be. They saw what they wanted to see, what fit their understanding of how the world worked. Mendez saw patterns and inconsistencies, the kind of details that didn't quite line up if you looked closely enough. Nina had been careful to maintain her cover, moving through the kitchen with the shuffling efficiency of someone going through motions, never showing the muscle memory that came from years of different training. But Mendez kept watching, kept noting things, kept building whatever assessment she was constructing. The intelligence brief that afternoon was routine according to Lieutenant Barnes, who mentioned it to Sergeant Chen while picking up a coffee. Increased chatter in the surrounding area, possible insurgent movement, recommendations to maintain heightened awareness. The same kind of brief they'd had a dozen times since Nina arrived. The background noise of a deployment where threats were constant but rarely materialized into anything immediate. The base would increase patrol frequency, double-check the perimeter sensors, make sure everyone knew where their gear was if things got interesting. Standard protocols for standard threats. Nina noted it the way she noted everything else, filing it away in the mental catalog she maintained without conscious effort. Threat assessment was something that never really turned off once you'd been trained for it. You couldn't stop tracking exits and angles and vulnerabilities any more than you could stop breathing. It was just part of how you process the world after enough time in places where processing it wrong got you killed. The kitchen cleanup after dinner service took 2 hours on a good night. Tonight wasn't a good night. Someone had burned an entire tray of chicken, welding it to the pan with a layer of carbonized protein that required serious scraping. The grease trap in the main sink had backed up, flooding the floor with water that smelled like every meal from the past week, and the ventilation system had started making a grinding noise that suggested something expensive was about to break. Nina worked through it with the same methodical efficiency she applied to everything else. Scrape the pans, clear the drain, mop the floor, check the inventory. Sergeant Chen had gone to file a maintenance request for the ventilation system, leaving Nina and Anderson to finish the closing procedures. Anderson moved like he was underwater, every motion weighted with exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. 6 months into a 9-month deployment, counting days until rotation, running on fumes and obligation. Through the serving window, Nina could see the mess hall slowly emptying. Soldiers finishing their meals, bussing their trays, heading back to their duties or their racks. The evening shift change meant a temporary surge of activity as personnel rotated through. Fresh faces replacing tired ones, the machine of military operations continuing its endless cycle. Morrison and his crew were still at their table, laughing about something, in no hurry to get anywhere. Officers clustered near the coffee station, discussing whatever officers discussed when they weren't being official. Captain Mendez sat alone at her usual spot. Tablet open, but her attention kept drifting to the kitchen. Nina could feel the weight of that observation, the way predators watch prey they haven't decided to chase yet. It created an itch between her shoulder blades, the kind of awareness that came from knowing someone was building a picture you didn't want completed. The sound reached her before the alarm did. A distant whistle, barely audible over the kitchen noise, the kind of sound that most people wouldn't register as significant. But Nina's body recognized it before her conscious mind processed the information. Incoming ordnance. Mortar round. Maybe rocket-propelled grenade. Trajectory suggested impact somewhere near the perimeter, probably the north side based on the angle. She was moving toward the floor when the explosion hit. Close enough to shake the building, far enough that it wasn't an immediate threat. The lights flickered but held. Dishes rattled on their shelves. In the mess hall, conversation stopped mid-sentence as everyone oriented toward the sound. Then the alarm started. Long, continuous wail that meant incoming fire, everyone to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Anderson froze in the middle of the kitchen, pan still in his hands. Eyes wide with the kind of panic that came from knowing something bad was happening, but not knowing what to do about it. In the mess hall, soldiers were moving with varying degrees of urgency, some sprinting for the exits, others still processing what the alarm meant, officers shouting orders that got lost in the chaos. Nina stayed low. Instincts from other deployments taking over despite 3 weeks of potato peeling. She tracked the sounds, counting seconds between impacts, building a mental map of where the fire was coming from. North perimeter, definitely. Multiple launch points based on the spread. Coordinated attack, not random harassment. Someone had planned this. Another explosion, closer this time. The building shook hard enough to knock pans off their hooks. The lights went out completely, emergency lighting kicking in after a 3-second delay that felt much longer. Red battle lamps cast everything in hellish shadows. Sergeant Chen burst back into the kitchen, his face pale in the emergency lighting. "Everybody out! Head for the bunkers, move!" Anderson dropped his pan and ran. Chen was right behind him, pausing only to make sure Nina was following. She moved toward the exit, but her attention was on the mess hall, on the soldiers trying to evacuate through doors that were creating bottlenecks, on the officers trying to establish order in circumstances that were deteriorating faster than anyone had expected. Captain Mendez was on her radio, face tight with concentration, listening to reports that were clearly not good. Lieutenant Barnes appeared at her elbow, saying something urgent. Mendez's expression shifted from concerned to alarmed. Nina reached the kitchen exit, just as the third explosion hit. This one was different, louder, closer, with a concussive force that suggested something heavier than mortars. The blast wave knocked her sideways into the doorframe. The building's structure groaned, metal and concrete protesting treatment they weren't designed to handle. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear secondary explosions, the distinctive crack of ammunition cooking off. They'd hit the armory. Or the fuel depot, maybe both. This wasn't harassment fire. This was a serious attack. The mess hall evacuation had turned chaotic. Soldiers pushing toward exits. Someone was down near the serving line, others trying to help while everyone else tried to get past. The careful order that defined military operations was fracturing under pressure, revealing how quickly training gave way to instinct when things went wrong fast enough. Nina's mind was racing through calculations she'd promised herself she wouldn't make anymore. Tactical assessment, threat evaluation, resource inventory. The kind of thinking that had defined her life before the reassignment, before the breakdown, before she'd decided that being invisible was safer than being capable. Another explosion. The north wall of the mess hall buckled inward, not collapsing, but compromised enough that dust and debris rained down on everyone inside. The emergency lighting in that section went dark. Someone was screaming. Multiple someones. The chaos was complete now. Any pretense of organized evacuation abandoned in favor of pure survival instinct. Captain Mendez was shouting into her radio, trying to get situation reports from other parts of the base. Her face told the story before her words did. This was bad. Worse than bad. The kind of situation where plans evaporated, and people had to make decisions with incomplete information and hope they weren't making things worse. Nina stood in the kitchen doorway, frozen between two versions of herself. The one who peeled potatoes and kept her head down and let other people handle problems above her pay grade. And the one who'd spent 3 years running operations in places where mistakes meant body bags and hesitation meant mission failure. Sergeant Chen grabbed her arm. "Vasquez, we need to move now." But she wasn't listening. Her attention was on the mess hall, on the soldiers struggling to evacuate through compromised exits, on the tactical situation that was spiraling toward catastrophe. Every instinct she'd developed during those classified years was screaming at her to act, to take control, to do something before more people got hurt. The building shook again, closer, definitely closer. Whatever was attacking them wasn't stopping, wasn't random, wasn't going to give them time to organize a proper response. The base's defensive positions were designed for harassment fire, not coordinated assault. They were in trouble, serious trouble, and from what she could hear on Mendez's radio, the situation was worse than anyone in the mess hall realized. The command post had been hit in the initial barrage. Major Carson, the base commander, was down, possibly dead, definitely incapacitated. The executive officer was trying to coordinate response from the alternate command center, but communications were spotty. Multiple fires. Casualties mounting. Perimeter sensors showing movement that suggested ground assault following the indirect fire. This wasn't just an attack. This was an attempt to overrun the entire base. Nina made her decision. Not consciously, not with deliberation, just the way you make decisions when there isn't time for anything except action. She pulled away from Sergeant Chen's grip and moved back into the mess hall, against the flow of soldiers trying to evacuate, toward Captain Mendez, who was still trying to make sense of reports that weren't making sense. Captain Mendez looked up as Nina approached, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation. This wasn't the time for questions from kitchen staff. This wasn't the time for anything except managing a crisis that was getting worse by the second. But something in Nina's posture stopped whatever dismissal she'd been about to deliver. Nina wasn't moving like kitchen staff anymore. The shuffle was gone, replaced with the purposeful efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Her eyes were scanning the room with professional assessment, cataloging details, building pictures that went beyond immediate chaos. "Captain,
you need to get these people out through the south exit."
"Not the main doors." Nina's voice was different too. Clipped, authoritative, the tone of someone used to giving orders in situations where hesitation killed people. "The attack pattern suggests they're trying to funnel us toward the north perimeter. Main exits put people in the kill zone." Mendez stared at her for half a second, processing this transformation. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's run this exact scenario before, ma'am. Different country, same tactics. They'll have positioned forces to catch whoever evacuates through the obvious routes. South exit puts people behind the mess hall structure, gives them cover to reach the actual bunkers instead of just running into open ground." Another explosion punctuated her words, close enough that the building's damaged structure groaned in protest. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Someone near the north wall was screaming about their leg. Mendez's training warred with her situation. Taking tactical advice from a corporal with a breakdown in her file went against every protocol. But protocols were written for normal circumstances, and nothing about this was normal. The reports coming through her radio were catastrophic. Command structure decimated. Multiple casualties. Fires spreading toward ammunition storage. Enemy forces breaching the perimeter in at least 2 locations. She made the same kind of decision Nina had made 30 seconds earlier. The kind you make when there isn't time for perfect information and hesitation guarantees disaster. "Barnes." Mendez snapped at her lieutenant. "Redirect evacuation through the south kitchen exit. Get everyone moving that direction, and find me whoever's still functional from the command staff." Barnes hesitated, glancing between Mendez and Nina with obvious confusion. "Now, Lieutenant." He moved. So did Mendez, turning back to Nina with an expression that promised explanations would be required later. "If you've got experience with this, I need it. Command post is gone, base commander is down, and we've got hostiles inside the wire. What else am I missing?" Nina's mind was already working through the tactical situation, pulling information from operations she'd run in other valleys in other countries against enemies who used similar playbooks. The indirect fire was meant to destroy command and control, create chaos. They'll press the ground assault while we're disorganized. Standard insurgent tactics for overrunning small bases. They're betting on panic and confusion to get inside before we can mount coordinated defense. How do we stop it? We don't stop it, ma'am. Not completely, but we can slow it down enough to organize evacuation of non-essential personnel and establish defensive positions that make them pay for every meter. They're counting on overwhelming us fast. We make it slow and expensive. They'll reconsider the investment. Mendez's radio crackled with another report. Lieutenant Williams from 2nd Platoon, voice tight with stress. We've got approximately 30 hostiles at the north gate. They breached the outer wire and they're moving on the vehicle depot. Request permission to engage. Granted, Mendez responded. Hold them as long as you can, then fall back to secondary positions. Ma'am, we don't have secondary positions at the vehicle depot. Nina pointed at Mendez's tactical map, still displayed on her tablet despite the chaos. There's a drainage culvert that runs behind the depot. Put people there with fields of fire covering the approach. Makes them come through a funnel instead of spreading out. Gives your people advantage even if they're outnumbered. Mendez relayed the information. Williams acknowledged, confusion evident in his voice about where this intel was coming from, but accepting it because he didn't have better options. The evacuation was moving more smoothly now, soldiers streaming through the kitchen and out the south exit instead of bottlenecking at the main doors. Sergeant Chen had taken charge of guiding people through, his earlier panic replaced with purpose. Anderson was helping someone with a leg injury, proving that exhaustion disappeared when circumstances required it. Morrison appeared out of the chaos, his crew right behind him. For once, he wasn't smirking. His face was pale, eyes showing the kind of fear that came from realizing training and reality operated on different scales. He saw Nina standing next to Captain Mendez, saw her pointing at tactical displays and speaking with authority that didn't match her kitchen assignment. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "Why are we listening to—" "Shut up, Morrison," Mendez cut him off. "Unless you've got tactical experience I don't know about, I don't have time for your questions. Vasquez, what else?" Nina was already thinking 3 moves ahead, building contingencies for a situation that was fluid and getting worse. "We need to secure the communications building. If they take that out, we lose contact with outside support, and someone needs to check on the armory. If that's fully engulfed, we need to establish perimeter that accounts for ammunition cooking off. Communications building is on the east side, that's behind enemy advance, yes ma'am. But if they're following standard tactics, they hit command first, then comms, then they try to isolate us completely before final assault. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they realize we're still coordinating. After that, the building becomes priority target." Mendez looked at her with an expression that mixed respect and fury. Respect for the competence, fury at the deception that had kept it hidden. "You're going to tell me your whole story when this is over, Corporal. Every classified detail. But right now, I need you to get to that communications building and make sure we maintain contact with outside support. Take whoever you need." Nina glanced around the mess hall, at the soldiers still evacuating, at Morrison, and his crew standing there looking lost, at the tactical situation that required more bodies than skill for what she needed to do. "I'll take Morrison's fire team," she said. "They're infantry, they've got weapons, and they're standing around looking useless." Morrison's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, indignation, then something that might have been relief that someone was giving him a clear task in circumstances that had become incomprehensible. "You've got to be kidding," he started, but Mendez cut him off again. "You're under Vasquez's command until I say otherwise, Specialist. She tells you to jump, you ask how high. Clear? But she's the difference between holding this base and watching it get overrun. Now move." Nina was already moving toward the south exit, not waiting to see if Morrison and his crew would follow. They would, because they didn't have better options, and because Captain Mendez had given them direct orders. Behind her, she could hear Morrison sputtering explanations to Davis and Rodriguez, trying to make sense of how the kitchen worker had suddenly become the person in charge. The night air was thick with smoke and the chemical smell of burning fuel. Nina moved through the darkness with Morrison's fire team trailing behind her. Their earlier confidence replaced with nervous energy that came from realizing their deployment had just become significantly more dangerous than they'd expected. The base was chaos in every direction. Fires burning in multiple locations, the distinctive crack of small arms fire, explosions still impacting with irregular frequency that suggested the attackers were conserving ammunition for specific targets. Nina's mind processed it all with cold efficiency, the kind of tactical clarity that came from years of operating in environments where awareness meant survival. She could map the enemy positions by sound alone, track their movement patterns, predict where they'd commit forces based on what they'd already done. This wasn't her first insurgent assault on a forward base. It wasn't even her fifth. The playbook was familiar enough that she could see 3 moves ahead. "Stay low, watch your spacing, and don't fire unless I tell you to," she said, without looking back at Morrison's team. "We're not here to fight. We're here to reach the communications building and hold it long enough for command to get support inbound." "Who put you in charge?" Morrison's voice was tight with stress and confusion. "Yesterday you were peeling potatoes, and now you're giving orders like someone who's done this before," Nina cut him off. "You want to argue about it, do it after we're not about to lose the entire base. Until then, shut up and follow." Davis made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been hysteria. "This is insane. We should be in the bunkers, not running around in the middle of an attack." "Bunkers are where you go when you're waiting for rescue," Nina said. "We're buying time for rescue to arrive. Different mission profile." They moved through the shadows between buildings, Nina navigating with the confidence of someone who'd memorized the base layout, despite spending all her time in the kitchen. She'd mapped every structure, every alley, every piece of cover during her 3 weeks of invisible observation. Information gathering was reflexive after enough years of operations work. You never knew when details would matter, so you collected everything and sorted it later. The communications building was a reinforced concrete structure on the east side of the base, designed to withstand indirect fire and maintain functionality during attacks. Smart design in theory. In practice, it just made it a more valuable target. Nina could see movement near the building's perimeter, figures advancing with tactical discipline that suggested trained fighters rather than opportunistic insurgents. "Contact, 11 o'clock, Rodriguez whispered. "Multiple hostiles approaching the building." "I see them," Nina confirmed. 6 fighters, standard assault formation. They're going to try to breach the main entrance. "We can't take 6 fighters with 4 people," Johnson said, his voice climbing toward panic. "We need to fall back, get..." "Reinforcements?" "We don't fight them head on," Nina interrupted. "We change their calculus. Morrison, you and Davis set up on that berm to our right. You'll have clear sight lines to their approach route. Rodriguez, Johnson, you're with me. We're going to circle around and hit them from the flank. When they take fire from 2 directions, they'll assume larger force and either retreat or go to ground. Either way, we buy time." Morrison was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. "That's a terrible plan. We'll be exposed, outnumbered. It's a great plan if you execute it properly. Bad plan if you stand here arguing while they breach that door. Your choice, but choose fast, because we're out of time." Something in Nina's tone cut through Morrison's resistance. Maybe it was the absolute certainty, the complete absence of doubt that had characterized her kitchen work for 3 weeks. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was just the realization that she actually knew what she was doing while he was making it up as he went along. "Fine," he said. "But if this goes wrong, we won't be alive to discuss it. Move." They split up, Morrison and Davis scrambling toward the berm, while Nina led Rodriguez and Johnson through a wide arc that would bring them up on the hostile force's flank. Her body moved through the darkness with muscle memory that had nothing to do with potato peeling. Low, fast, silent, using terrain and shadow the way she'd been trained to in schools that didn't appear on her official record. Rodriguez was keeping up, his infantry training kicking in now that someone was giving clear orders. Johnson was slower, less confident, but following because the alternative was being left alone in the dark. They reached position just as the hostile fighters stacked up on the communications building entrance. Nina signaled Morrison with 2 quick flashes from her flashlight. A prearranged signal he probably didn't remember from basic training, but would understand meant now. His shot cracked through the darkness, followed immediately by Davis firing. Both rounds went wide, but accuracy wasn't the point. The hostile fighters scattered, returning fire toward the berm while trying to identify the threat. Nina opened up from the flank, controlled pairs, aimed at center mass. Her first target went down. The second one dove for cover. Rodriguez and Johnson were firing too, their shots less precise but adding to the chaos. For 30 seconds, the night was full of muzzle flashes and the sharp crack of rifles, sound echoing off buildings and making it impossible to judge how many shooters were actually involved. Then silence, broken only by shouting in a language Nina understood but wouldn't admit to understanding. The hostile fighters were pulling back exactly as predicted. 6 shooters had encountered resistance from 2 directions and decided the target wasn't worth the casualties. They'd regroup, reassess, try again with more forces or different tactics. But for now, the communications building was secure. Nina moved toward the structure, keeping low, weapon ready. Morrison and his crew emerged from their positions, faces showing shock that was equal parts adrenaline and disbelief. "Holy shit," Davis breathed. That actually worked. "Plans usually work when they're based on actual tactics instead of hope," Nina said. She reached the communications building door and pounded twice. "Friendly forces, we're coming in!" The door cracked open, revealing Specialist Park, one of the signals personnel, holding a sidearm with shaking hands. "Thank God. We heard shooting and thought—" "You thought correctly," Nina cut him off. "They're trying to take this building. We bought you some time, but they'll be back with more people. How's your comm status?" "We're operational. Got contact with battalion. They're scrambling quick reaction force, but ETA is 45 minutes minimum." 45 minutes. An eternity in tactical time. Nina turned to Morrison and his crew, seeing them differently than she had during all those meal services. Still cocky, still young, still convinced of their own capability despite minimal real experience. But capable enough if someone pointed them in the right direction. "Here's how this works," she said. "We hold this building for 45 minutes. We don't have to win, we just have to not lose. That means establishing defensive positions, managing ammunition, and not doing anything stupid. Morrison, you take the north windows. Rodriguez and Davis, you've got east and west. Johnson, you're with me on the south side. Park, you maintain comms and keep command updated on our status." "Who died and made you captain?" Morrison tried one more time to assert himself, but there was no conviction behind it. He'd seen her work, seen the results, and whatever authority he thought he had based on infantry credentials had evaporated somewhere between the mess hall and the communications building. "Nobody died," Nina said. "But plenty of people will if we don't hold this position. So stop asking questions and start following orders. We've got 45 minutes to prove we're worth rescuing." She moved to the southern windows, checking sight lines and angles, building mental maps of approaches and kill zones. Behind her, Morrison's crew was taking positions, their movements less confident than they'd been hours earlier when they were mocking her about cold potatoes. Funny how reality changed perspectives. The radio crackled with Captain Mendez's voice. "Communications building, this is Alpha 6. What's your status?" Nina took the handset from Park. "Alpha 6, building is secure. We've got 5 personnel defensive positions established. Be advised, hostiles attempted breach approximately 2 minutes ago. We repelled initial assault, but expect follow-up with larger force." "Understood. Relief force is inbound, ETA 43 minutes. Can you hold?" Nina looked around the communications building. Concrete walls thick enough to stop small arms fire. Limited entry points. Good fields of fire from elevated positions. 5 soldiers with adequate ammunition and clear mission parameters. Against unknown number of hostiles with unknown capabilities and demonstrated willingness to press attacks despite casualties. The math wasn't great. "But it wasn't impossible either. We'll hold," Nina said into the radio. "Just make sure that relief force doesn't take 44 minutes. She set down the handset and checked her weapon one more time. 43 minutes. She'd held positions for longer in worse circumstances. The difference was this time everyone would know about it. This time there'd be no hiding behind kitchen assignments and potato-peeling anonymity. Whatever happened in the next 43 minutes would rewrite her story completely. Morrison was watching her from his position at the north window. "You're not really kitchen staff, are you?" "Right now I'm the person keeping you alive," Nina said. "What I was before doesn't matter. What matters is holding this building until relief arrives. So watch your sector, conserve your ammunition, and don't fire until you've got clear targets." "Questions?" Morrison shook his head. For once he had nothing to say. The night settled into tense waiting. Fires still burning across the base. Sporadic gunfire in the distance. The distinctive sound of helicopters approaching, still too far away to matter, but close enough to represent hope. 43 minutes until rescue. 43 minutes to prove that the most dangerous person on base had been hiding in the kitchen all along. Nina chambered around and settled into position, eyes scanning the darkness for movement. Whatever came next, she was ready. Not as the broken soldier who peeled potatoes, but as the operator she'd always been, the one who'd been waiting for circumstances to require her particular skills again. The base would hold. The relief force would arrive, and when the smoke cleared and the casualty reports were filed, everyone would have to reconsider their assumptions about Corporal Nina Vasquez. But that was later. Right now there was only the mission. Hold the building. Protect the communications. Buy time for rescue. Everything else could wait.